So going into next season in the Championship, a lot is being made of Birmingham and Wrexham in particular. You've got Birmingham, who have just broken the points record in League One, racking up a whopping 111 points throughout that campaign. And Wrexham, with their Hollywood owners coming up to the Championship, they're bound to ruffle some feathers, aren't they? What are the current prospects looking like with both of those clubs? In today's video, we're going to be having a bit of a detailed look into each of them, what their realistic goals for next season are going to be, and what they're probably each going to have to do over this summer to achieve those goals. So like we were saying before, Birmingham have absolutely blown the competition in League One out of the water this season. 111 points, and Wrexham not too far behind them. They finished on 92 in the end, and obviously these two sides will be joined by one of Charlton or Leyton Orient. That game will be decided at Wembley. Now the first thing that's apparent with Birmingham especially is that not just were they amazing in terms of racking up the points on the eye and things like that, but the underlying numbers, they absolutely demolished League One this season and made it look like light work. For example, when looking into the amount of goals that Birmingham scored this season, and even digging deeper than that into the XG, they were the best team in the league in League One, an XG of 79.03. They scored 80 goals, by far the highest scorers in the league. What I think is really interesting though is looking into these XG numbers. Wrexham are all the way down in 13th in League One, only racked up an XG of 59.24 throughout the campaign. They were a little bit more clinical than their XG would lead on to though. They scored 64 goals throughout the campaign, but Wrexham weren't exactly a side who were, tearing through teams on a regular basis and creating chance after chance that maybe Birmingham were. Then once again, on the flip side of that, in terms of XG against, Birmingham were by far and away the best team in League One, only conceding an XG of 34.89. They only conceded 28 goals throughout the entire season, which is absolutely amazing when you look at how many goals some of these other sides were conceding. But once again, in the case of Wrexham, they weren't even a top 6 side in League One in terms of those underlying numbers, only 9th in the league in terms of XG face. So what do those underlying numbers tell us? Well, straight off the bat, I think it's clear that Birmingham are operating at a considerably higher level than Wrexham coming up to the Championship, but I think most people already knew that. The next thing which I think is really apparent with Wrexham especially is the average age of their squad. So they've got the second oldest team in League One, an average age of 28.4. You compare that to Birmingham, who are considerably younger, 26.3 years old, the average age of that Birmingham squad, and you'd probably say that Blues are in and around the sweet spot of what you probably want your average age of your squad to be, around 26, where a lot of your players will be peaking. They've still got some good young players in there that are meshed in well with some of the more experienced heads, whereas Wrexham really are quite a top-heavy sort of squad in terms of having a lot of players who are over the age of 30. Obviously, that's been their sort of recruitment model, and we'll sort of dive into the reasons as to why this has happened for Wrexham and why they have quite an old squad. But coming up to the Championship, I do think that is something that Wrexham long-term will be looking to address. Because one of the biggest reasons I think Wrexham are in a situation like this where they have such an ageing squad is because, generally speaking, they don't tend to fork out that big in terms of actually spending money on players in terms of transfer fees. A lot has been made of Wrexham and obviously the Hollywood money that's been injected into that side, but generally speaking, when we talk about the money that Wrexham have spent, a lot of that has gone on wages comparatively to actually spending money on players. You can see that Sam Smith, by far and away their most expensive signing of all time, but in recent years, compared to a lot of these other players where, he's the only player they've signed for over £1 million. Generally speaking, it's been Wrexham's recruitment model to pick players up on a free transfer. They tend to be over the age of 30. They can give them a decent financial package in terms of a contract. That's the way that they've been quite crafty in going about their business, really, and it's worked really well for them in the lower leagues. But the crucial question is, coming up to the Championship, will that sort of recruitment model still mesh with the second tier, or are Wrexham going to have to adapt their ways? Because obviously when you compare it to the average spend of Birmingham in recent years, Birmingham absolutely blow Wrexham out of the water, obviously. The big deal being Jay Stansfield. These are Birmingham's all-time transfers, so you've got quite a few older ones that are mixed in there with some of the newer signings. But Birmingham, under their new ownership, have not been afraid to splash the cash on transfer fees. They've been attracting younger players to this project to build around for the future. Obviously, Stansfield probably has been the figurehead of that. And from a Birmingham perspective, you don't expect that sort of recruitment model to change much going into the Championship next season. Now, in terms of transfers and potential spend of both clubs, they're both going to have a real wealth of money that is going to take a few Championship clubs by surprise. You know, prior to this transfer window opening, we've already had it here from Sky Sports that Birmingham and Wrexham are likely to be targeting similar players to the likes of Leicester, Ipswich and Southampton, and even some of the smaller Premier League clubs, which speaks to their ambitions at the moment. Obviously, we've been covering Wrexham quite a lot on the channel over these past few weeks on the Championship transfer rumour roundup, and the big star that they've been linked with recently is Fulham's Tom Cairney, and this is the sort of signing that they have been very successful in making in recent years. Cairney, someone who could be made available on a free transfer this summer, and Wrexham would be willing to pay quite a lot in wages. Reportedly, they'd be willing to offer him 50 grand a week, which would make him one of the highest paid players in the second tier. It does also point out here that as things stand, Jay Rodriguez is their highest earner on 15 grand a week, but you can imagine coming up to the Championship, there'd be promotion clauses in quite a few of their players' contracts, and the sort of players they're going to be targeting this season, yeah, Wrexham's wage bill is about to go stratospheric, you'd imagine. The other thing that I find interesting with both clubs as well is how much patience is going to be given to both of their managers. Obviously, in the case of Phil Parkinson, he's done an absolutely incredible job with Wrexham, albeit, you know, the club have been a bit of a big fish in a small pond in recent years in terms of financial muscles and what they've been up against, relatively speaking, and that's not maybe quite going to be the case in the Championship next season. But Parkinson's an interesting one because he has managed over 140 games in the Championship during his career so far, but he doesn't have a brilliant track record in the second tier, only averaging 0.82 points per game in his entire Championship career. Now, with that being said, the jobs that he's been in previously in the Championship, it's a totally different ball game managing Wrexham going into next season compared to, you know, when he was last in the Championship managing Bolton. But just how cutthroat are we potentially going to be seeing Wrexham being next season? Because Parkinson, during his entire tenure as Wrexham boss, has never really hit a rough patch. It's just been win after win after win. Whereas coming up to the Championship next season, I can't help but think that there will be prolonged periods where Wrexham maybe are going to go without a win. Say if they are in the relegation zone after 2 or 3 months of the season, does the board and the ownership still have the backbone to stick by Parkinson, or are they going to be quite brutal and make that change when they think that another manager would be available who'd probably give them a better chance of survival and progressing even further up the ladder? Because I mean, absolutely no doubt that a club like Wrexham, with how many eyeballs are on them at the moment, they could definitely attract a top level caliber Championship manager, and Parkinson's done a brilliant job of navigating them through the lower leagues, and I definitely get there will be a sense of loyalty to him there, especially within the fan base. But when push comes to shove, and Wrexham are a club who are as ambitious as they are, if next season doesn't get off to a flying start, I could envisage a scenario where we are talking about a change of manager at some point. Obviously, in the case with Birmingham, this sort of conversation isn't as applicable because we've never seen Davis in the Championship. You know, it'll be his first time managing it in it, but Birmingham could quite similarly be just as brutal in making a change if things aren't going well for them, you know, early on into next season. They've definitely got lofty ambitions, haven't they? But in terms of what's realistic for both teams coming into next season, I think it's obvious to say that Birmingham are definitely working from a higher platform right now. In terms of their squad value in League One last season, Birmingham's squad value here absolutely ghosts everyone else in League One. Birmingham had a squad which was valued at over 44 million euros in the third tier. I mean, Wrexham, you know, pound for pound compared to some of these other sides, they were valued fairly well in League One, had a squad value of just over 13 million euros, but compared to Birmingham, that's nothing. Just to sort of put into context of what those squad values would look like in the context of fellow Championship clubs, this is what these two sides will be up against next season. So in the Championship season that's just gone by, Burnley had the most valuable squad in the Championship with a squad valued at over 195 million euros. These are the sorts of margins that we're talking about here. Wrexham's squad value of around about 30 million euros would have made them by far the least valuable squad in the Championship last season. It shows how much work they've got to do coming up to the Championship. Whereas Birmingham have already been working with a Championship level squad in the second tier. You know, Birmingham's squad value in League One last season was pretty much the same as Swansea City's. So Swansea, who had a squad value of around about 44 million, they punched above their weight, relatively speaking. They finished 11th in the Championship in the end, and for Birmingham, I think that's fairly realistic that they definitely could push on into that sort of mid-table realm, and then depending on some of the players that they sign, could even go one step further than that. The story of Wrexham has been absolutely, amazing to follow in terms of the back-to-back-to-back promotions, but they've got so much work, I think, that they need to do over this summer to make that squad Championship competitive from front to back, not just in terms of buying players, but in terms of letting players go as well. That I do think it would be a realistic ambition for Wrexham next season in the Championship, that they're looking for consolidation, whereas Birmingham, right now, it feels like they're probably having even loftier ambitions, that you're looking at mid-table, maybe even challenging for the top 6. Listen, a lot could change between now and the start of the season, and we can't read too much into either side as of yet, because there's so much transfer activity to go between now and the start of the new campaign. But I'm really excited to have these two in the Championship next season. They're both going to spend, no doubt, quite a lot over the summer. And then whoever joins them out of Charlton and Leyton Orient definitely is going to have their work cut out for them next season as well. But I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on all this in the comments down below. What's your current take on Birmingham and Wrexham, and how strong do you think they'll be coming up to the Championship next season? Other than that though, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.